As the recent report Closing the Numeracy Gap made clear, proficiency with numbers matters deeply in modern societies. But does its importance rival that of literacy? Let's ask Ann Sato, president of George Brown College, Don Drummond, the Stauffer Dunning Fellow at the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University, Jerry Connolly, Director of Policy at the Learning Partnership, and Annie Kidder, Executive Director of People for Education. And it's good to have all of you back here at TVO with us tonight. Annie, do you agree we have a substantial gap in numeracy in Ontario?
I agree that there are issues with numeracy and with math. I hope it's never a choice between literacy and numeracy, that really what's important is we have to be looking at a broad range of learning and maybe more importantly, look at all of the skills and competency underneath that allow kids to learn in whichever area in terms of reading and writing, in terms of mathematics. But it is important that we look at the data we have, we go, there are for some students, and again, we should use our math to kind of drill into that to go, who's struggling in math and who isn't? And we need to use that data to figure out how to make improvements, not simplistic political ones, but ones that really are attached to what the data say.
What are you suggesting with that last phrase that you just said?
Well, I think it can be pretty easy to look at a number simplistically. You know, we always love the up good, down bad graph, and then we make a judgment, and then we have a kind of political response. So I know, let's teach math for longer. And I don't mean to be too sarcastic and mean, but we have to be careful in our reaction to numbers. We have to know our math to think about those numbers, disaggregate those numbers, and look at where are there issues. There are certainly issues, for instance, there's streaming in high school. There are serious issues in grade 9 and 10 applied math. They've been there for years. What are we doing about that? Those are a lot of those kids are kids who go on to college. So it's actually drilling down in the numbers that are important, but also not putting all of our eggs in the math basket or kind of swinging over to math now from somewhere else.
Don't overreact. I'm going to do what you just said, and that is go to college. How many students go to George Brown?
28,000 full-time students.
Of that 28,000 full-time students, what percentage do you think come to you with inadequate numeracy skills?
We don't test them all, because if you don't need math in your program, you might not get tested. But we test about 2,000 every semester, so we test about 6,000 every year. And about 35 to 40% of those, 800 or so, test at a foundation level. So rather than going into their regular math course at a college level, we have to put them through a foundations level course.
What does that mean, foundation level?
Well, it goes back and reviews some of the basics. And what we found we're reviewing is actually things that they were probably taught in grades 6, 7, and 8. Anything from decimals to fractions to percentages, proportions, things like that.
A third of the students who come to you don't have those basic numeracy skills?
A third of the students that we test.
That you test.
So we don't test all of them because they don't all need math. In some cases, we've changed our strategies because we're always changing how we do things. So in technology, for construction engineering technology, we actually don't test them anymore, but we've created a new course that actually combined some of the foundation and the college level math so that we do it at the same time. And students are finding that very positive rather than trying to fit in an extra course. Because if you go into foundation level courses, you have to take an extra course and then you have to catch up at the college level once you've passed that.
Okay, Madam President, I'm trying hard not to be mortified by this information. Are you mortified by this information?
I'm very, very concerned about this information. And the reason I'm concerned is that we're focusing a lot on retention of our students. So when students come into one of our programs, we want them to be successful. We want them to complete. And our attrition rates, or the dropout rate between first and second year, is quite high. And we're trying to change that. And one of the key things that indicators are pointing to is the math. So half of our academic divisions said their top 3 classes from a failure point of view are in the math disciplines. And the fact that, as I say, a third of our students, 35 to 40% actually of those we test, are testing at a foundation level, that shows me we have a problem. So we're doing a lot of work to support those students to make sure that they can complete their program.
What's your sense of how it is at Queen's?
Well, university is very extreme because it's a binary choice. If you want to take mathematics, you go into first year calculus and linear algebra, which have the highest failure rate of any courses, and that typically ends somebody's academic career in those areas, or more likely you don't take any mathematics. And you made the comparison to literacy. Typically when you go to a university, you take some kind of exam going in, and then you're streamed. You'll go into English literature if you do reasonably well, or you might go into English composition, but you will take some form of English. But the vast majority of university students don't take any mathematics or numeracy courses at all. And of course you're not tested on it. If I graduate with a degree in economics, it may be implicit in that granting of a degree that I am numerate and have some command of mathematics, but it may not be the case. We really don't know.
So I'm inferring from that most of the people who are taking general arts at Queen's, probably typical of most places, don't have the numeracy skills they ought to have. Maybe the ones who take math and science do, but the rest of them don't.
Well, the only numeracy skills they would have were the ones they came in with from K to 12. And as we know from the testing, that those aren't very good.
Yeah, exactly. Jerry, what's your sense of it?
Well, I'm going to pick up on what Annie said because she sort of commented on one of the announcements that the government made recently about having an extra time to teach math. And I totally agree with her. It's not a simplistic solution. But one of the things, if you recall, we used to have something called Literacy for All. And everybody focused on literacy, every subject, every grade. And one of the things that the announcement does is going to put good teachers, competent teachers into every class, every school. Well, there are competent teachers in the schools now, but they may not have the math background. And they're going to work with the teachers. But my sense is it shouldn't be an additional hour. It should be across all subjects.
Let's just be clear. Are you talking about an additional hour for the teachers to learn how to teach better, or for the students?
For the student. Well, the idea of the announcement that the government made was to have teachers go in, math teachers go into every school, and every school offer 1 hour of math instruction per grade per year. My sense is that is not necessarily what will make the difference, but if we incorporated math across the curriculum, not only in grade 1 to 8 or 9 to 12, but also in colleges and universities, so we have a numerate society, and really focus on making numeracy for all an important, and I agree that we need to focus on foundational skills, but not at the expense of problem solving.
Don, what do you think of the notion that is in this report, which is, people would never say, writing and speaking, I'm no good at that. But apparently they have no shame saying that about mathematics or numeracy skills. We have to change that?
Yeah, absolutely, because you're restricting yourself. And you posed the question the other day in the other interview, you can get by in life if you're literate but not numerate. Can you do the inverse? And absolutely you can, but immediately you've excluded yourself from about half the things and half the jobs you might want to do. And why would you want to do that to yourself? And why would we want to do that to a young person? And say, okay, you can't work in the financial sector, you can't be an engineer, you can't do anything in the science field, but you can exist in this little quadrant here. Well, no, we don't want to encourage that.
And also, I think even, and I would probably go, yeah, I'm not a math person, except I use math all the time. So that in fact, in your life, no matter what you are, the concepts behind math are incredibly important. And I always use my poor daughter as an example, who's an N of 1, but she has graduated from York University with an honors degree in psychology, did advanced statistics, and does not know her times tables, just so you know. And she's terrible at arithmetic in her head, but on the other hand, her deep understanding, so that you read the newspaper and understand whether economists actually do know math. That's an important skill to have. Whether politicians are telling you the truth, an understanding of the meaning behind numbers is important for everybody, not just your job. So I agree that it has to be that we've divided it too much, and we've gone, I'm not a math person, you are, or whichever way around it is, and that we have to think of it differently, and that may change the way we teach it, the way we think of what are the core skills underneath that you need to have in order to get to. So yes, part of it may be the basics, but another part of it may be a different persistence, practicing, working hard, those kinds of things.
Does your daughter mind that you out her on television as being incapable of doing
this
times
morning
tables?
I asked her, I said, I am going to say this, is that all right? She's totally proud of she goes, but she can understand statistics in a way that I totally can't. So she's numerate completely. She just doesn't have arithmetic skills.
People never say I'm not good at numeracy. They say I'm not good at math, and just bringing out the whole
That's
concept
good.
of what is different about this and how do you apply this knowledge in everyday life, and just realizing how important it is, I think is critical.
Do you think? I guess by the time it gets to you, is it too late? Do you have to have these skills, in other words, but by the time you graduate high school?
It would be ideal if the students developed those skills before they got to us, because what we're doing is we're taking extra time, and they're taking extra time and spending extra money to redevelop those foundational skills. And we're trying to focus their applied knowledge on sort of higher level skills that they're going to need in the workplace. And there's a lot that we have to cover. So it would be ideal. But until we have that, and it's not a simple answer, it is multifaceted. Until we have some of those solutions in place, we're going to continue to do what we're doing, and we're going to continue to try and do it better. So that when we talk about assessment and the whole concept of assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning, so that we can use those tools so that students can understand where they're weak, and we can use technology perhaps to reinforce those mechanisms, and that's going to be really important. So we'll keep doing it, but obviously it would be ideal, more ideal, if we had them with those skills before they came to us.
But Annie talked about the conceptual learning and the numeracy and the foundational, and I don't think it is one or the other. And that's one of the as you know, the debate right now is that kids should learn the foundational skills. I think that a good teacher teaches both, and you have to teach both. But I think one of the things we do in education is we're very siloed. And so we have math and science and English, and if we could have a much more interdisciplinary approach with a focus obviously on content, but then a focus on problem solving within the context of all of the disciplines.
Can I just make sure I understand this? You not only want people to know what 6 times 5 is, but you want them to understand the concept of what 6 times 5 is. Is that what you mean?
Yes, and you know what's interesting, and this goes against what people are saying, is that in the EQAO tests,
Yeah, they actually do fine at that.
kids do very fine at
Yes.
6 times 6 at
Yeah.
multiplication fractions or whatever. They just can't apply that
Yeah.
to problem
And
solving.
that's really, that is using the data for what it should be used at. So instead, we have this reaction saying they need to learn their times tables, but in fact, the data says they know their times tables. What they don't know is what to do with it. So that, again, applying that to reading about the latest polls about whatever and knowing what that means, that's where they're struggling more. And I would still argue that there are kids going through who end up in the applied stream who are failing or not learning and are going to college, and that one is also real, and they're
just
really
being
struggling.
pushed through?
Streaming is a problem, and it's a
They're
problem.
going into
yeah.
from grade 8 into
Yeah.
grade 9 without the skills, the numeracy skills
Yeah.
that they need, and they're put into applied. And the intention was very good. The intention was to deal with their interests, but it ends up being streaming. I totally agree. It ends up being streaming, and I agree. We are not serving these kids well. There's a very high failure rate in the applied courses. And those are maybe the kind of kids that
And then they're getting to the next level
get
of math and not
50%
doing
and they
well
go
at
into
it, and then they go to
math,
college, and then they're
they end up
lost.
in-
Yeah.
Let me ask you about some of your students, because I'm assuming that if they're going to go become economists and that kind of thing, that they're pretty strong on math and numeracy. But how are they at literacy?
Typically not that good in writing, and that's simply because they don't have very much practice. So as an example of that, there's only one course in the entire 4 years of a bachelor's in economics at Queen's University in which there's a written project. Your first 2 years are taken in a couple of hundred students in a class, and they're multiple choice, and there's no written questions, and there's no, what can you do with that number of students? One course has a project that's about 7 pages. So what I was finding when I was at the federal government or I was at the TD Bank, I thought that my role was to teach them how to apply the economic theory and the quantitative methods, and I was teaching them how to write, and that was not a role that I would anticipate. But I think the answer at the post-secondary education level is to shift the way the emphasis from the discipline knowledge, that's still there as a taken, but it has to be to a broader suite of competencies. And the beauty of that, it aligns up perfectly with what employers are now saying they're looking for. Because if you look at the recent surveys of the Business Council of Canada, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Conference Board, they're saying, I'm not just hiring somebody because they've got a bachelor's or master's degree in economics. I want them to have strong written and oral communication skills. I want them to be strong in problem solving. I want them to be able to work in teamwork. Well, we don't train to that, and we don't test that in a university. So there's a number of pilot projects, and interestingly enough, both my alma maters, University and Queen's, are involved in different pilot projects in which the focus is on competencies. So when you have that piece of paper where it's a BA in sociology or economics, there's a stamp on there that you're able to communicate verbally, you can do good presentations, you can do good writing, you've had experience in working in teamwork, and this should help line up the people to what the employers are looking for, get
And then you can
jobs,
kind of
get
think
better
across
employment.
as opposed to and
Yeah,
Think
exactly.
across?
yeah. Well,
But
that you-
there's
yeah,
a
you-
huge,
yeah.
there's a
Sorry,
huge
go ahead.
pushback to that, because if I'm a professor and I teach Tudor history, that's all I want to teach. And I'm not going to teach somebody how to write. That should have been done in grade school, but that's life.
Okay,
If they
should
don't
it-
know how to do it, so there's a lot of hurdles to cross before that's going to be accepted across the post-secondary education
Should have been done,
institutions.
but hasn't been done. And so, as Anne was suggesting, you don't want to waste a lot of money in first year not learning the courses you're supposed to be learning because you're still trying to figure out how to read and write and do numeracy.
Yeah.
Surely that's the case.
Absolutely, that's the case, and I'm sure all students would agree with us on that, and faculty would agree with us as well. But I'll just like to say that in college, we're actually focusing on those things, and there isn't as much of a debate. So employers have told us in many rounds of research that they expect the students or the graduates that they hire to have the technical skills depending on what program that they took. But it is those other broader, softer skills like problem solving, like communications, like teamwork. And that's why we've committed to having 100% of our programs have a field education or experiential learning component before students graduate. And that's where they round out those skills. And they also see how they're going to use the knowledge that they've learned in class. And it's that context, it's understanding that context that I think is so important and makes a huge difference in how people even think about achievement and the confidence that they have in doing the work.
What I'm hearing around the table from all four of you, though, is that by the time too many people graduate from high school in the province of Ontario, Annie, they can't do numeracy.
Except, so I think that then if we take this, that part of the problem then is, again, it goes back to eggs in baskets. If we only measure and only focus on 3 subjects, reading, writing, and math, that's the only kind of public reporting we do about how are we doing in these areas. And we don't publicly report on how are we doing at all of those other so-called soft skills or non-cognitive skills. How are we doing at what Jerry said, being able to understand that if I'm taking, grade 9 or grade 10 history, then I can look at, I use mathematics in a lot of, or numeracy in a lot of that understanding, that we have to get away from thinking that that's a good proxy measure for how the system's doing, because we'll end up making a mistake another way. And to me, it's let's measure, not necessarily test everything more, but let's figure out ways to assess more broadly so that we're graduating kids who can write, read, are numerate, and understand how to collaborate, because all of those are the things that are going to allow them to keep learning.
But this is the thing. I'm not looking to name and blame and shame here, but surely we have to have a higher percentage of people graduating from high school in this province who can read, write, and do sums. Surely we have to do that,
there
right?
is a literacy test which demonstrates that they are able to reach a certain level in literacy. And to get back to your, I'm going to use the term 21st century skills, which I'm sure you've heard about. And there's a sort of a common set of skills that are really critical. And those, you can't teach skills in isolation from knowledge. And so I think that the idea is that one of the things that the government is looking at and practitioners are looking at is trying to incorporate experiential learning within the context of teaching those other skills. And I think that's going to be more engaging. First of all, students tend to be as engaged when they get to grade 6, or 4 to 6. And I think that turns them off, and it turns them off math. When they get into grade 9, I think we need to rethink about how we deliver mathematics in high school. And that's probably a number 1 priority. But these kids can learn. Of
course.
They can learn. And every teacher wants to do the best possible job. So the question is, what is the best pedagogy? I don't think it's a matter of rewriting curriculum in the elementary school. I think it's a matter of refocusing on the things that we think are important. And I like your notion of competency-based. I think
But it's also really important when you say, but we're graduating these kids. I mean, actually, in Canada, 15-year-olds in Ontario do very, very well. They do well compared to OECD countries. Even in math, they added more jurisdictions, and now we're 13th, but we're 13th out of like 75. So we should be careful. Again, to use 2 metaphors, eggs, baskets, throwing out babies with bathwater here, that we don't actually suddenly go, we have a national emergency, which somebody did say last year.
So you're not buying the report?
No. I buy the report in terms of looking at things carefully and specifically in areas that need improvement. But to say that we are graduating in Ontario from our high schools kids who can't read or write or do math, some kids do very, 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 very well. Some kids, we're not sure what happens to them when they get to university. So we just have to make sure we don't suddenly blanketly take this particular number and apply it to the whole system.
Why we need to be careful in what we're measuring and striving for is to watch what's happening in the United States. So their results are even worse than Canada's. They're at a third world level type of result. And the U.S. administration is enormously embarrassed by that. And the underperforming schools are told, you're only going to teach 2 subjects, math and English, all day long, and you're going to test the kids relentlessly against a similar test like the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. And guess what? They are going to do better on that test. Are they going to be better students? Are they going to find more meaningful jobs and be more satisfied? And when the entire economy shifts in 10 years, are they going to be resilient to that? I will bet you no. I will bet that they will be worse off for that. But they will. The next time these so-called PISA scores come out from the OECD, they will probably do a little bit better. And maybe better than Canada.
But maybe not better citizens.
That's not the right, but you know, if that's your only goal, that's the way to do it.
Okay, we're down to 2 minutes here, and I want to just, let's put one more issue on our, what shaped table is this? V-shaped table, because they talk about creating a provincial roundtable in order to get, I guess, all the stakeholders around and figure out what you're going to do about this. Jerry, you like the idea of a roundtable?
Well, one of the things that we're very good at in education is working in silos. And one of the advantages, the roundtable, and I know that there's a lot of discussion about whether or not it could be useful, but if we can get people together from colleges, universities, government, and business, as well as K-12, and come up with some very specific deliverables. Here are the things we want to accomplish within a specific time frame. I truly believe that we could make inroads. It's not the answer to everything, but it's a beginning of trying to address some of the issues that we talk about. And it's not a simple answer either. It's much, but I would like to see numeracy for all being much more part of our way of thinking about it, just like literacy for all.
And the roundtable, what do you think?
I think it's a good idea. I think we do have to break down those silos. This is a multifaceted problem. As an engineer, I could say I like to take a systems end-to-end approach, and I think if we can get the right people at the table who could agree on an objective, that would be number one, and that's not always easy to do. Then focus their attention because they know the different areas, and if we can put that together and start tackling some of these issues on a shorter term basis, then we can develop a comprehensive short and long-term plan.
How long have you been doing People for Education?
Nearly 20 years.
How many roundtables have you seen in 20 years?
Many.
Are they useful?
Oh, sometimes they are, but I would argue that we need a roundtable to look at what you're talking about. Are we actually, you know, building the kinds of kids we need for Canada, for our world? Are we building all the right competencies and skills? We need a roundtable to talk about that. I think it'll be a terrible mistake to pull together a lot of knowledgeable people and people who can talk to just focus on math, because then we're going to stay in the same little silo we've been in.
Don, last word to you.
I have some expertise in failed commissions and roundtables, so I can speak of what works and what doesn't work. They work when you got a strong buy-in before you start off. If there's buy-in from the educators and buy-in from the Ministry of Education, training colleges, and universities, then a roundtable can bring down the stakeholders, help approval for what you're finally do, and inform the process. But it can only be the tip of the iceberg. There's a big part of the iceberg underneath. We need a lot of research in this area. You think we would know this, but we don't. There's a lot of questions still revolving around it. Resources need to be, roundtable's not going to resolve that. And it has to be, hey, we want to do this, we're committed to do this, all the stakeholders are lined up to do this, and now the roundtable is going to help us. But if not everybody's lined up behind it, the roundtable just talk each other and then it'll peter away and nothing will happen.
That's a very sad, somber note to leave us on, but that's our time.
That's it.
Thanks, everybody. I want to thank everybody at this table who's got Ann in their name. And that would be Ann Sato and Geraldine Ann Connolly. And then on the other side of the table, Annie Kidder. Don, do you have an Ann in your name anymore?
You can call me Ann.
I'm going to call, and Don Ann Drummond. There we go. Good of all of you to join us at TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.